Today on the bench we have a President George. So this is the original version made back in the late 90s. I'd say this was probably made like late 1999, early 2000. All the semiconductor date codes are in the 90s. But the customer, I've done a lot of radios for this customer, and I've never worked on this one, and he sold it. He used to use it, was working fine. Using another radio, or other radios now, decided he wanted to get rid of this one. So I think he said he sold it on eBay. He sold it somewhere, but he sold it. The new buyer got it, and it wouldn't turn on. So, oh crap. It was working when I shipped it, so he refunded the guy's money, had him send the radio back, and he sent it to me. And yep, sure enough, it wouldn't turn on. And honestly, it's kind of a shame. It was really no damage. It was nobody's fault. Well, somebody at some point in time has probably been in this. So this has a little black box. It's inside the big black box. The little black box here is a President module. Get the light just right. You can see that. It's President MR3. That's their ASC, or the automatic squelch control. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with this exact radio. I haven't worked on a lot of these things. But I think originally they didn't have this module, or they had something else. And this was basically a bodge at the time by President to increase the performance, or how the ASC module worked. But you can see, it's a factory installed. No doubt about it, the way the parts are in here. The biggest giveaway is the blue wire here. You follow it through, it comes around. The reason I say it's factory, it's got the factory corrosive glue holding that wire down. So that was definitely installed by the factory. But this module is what caused the problem. The problem is where it was mounted. It looks like originally it was glued down back here. The problem is when I took the covers off, this module was flipped around and it was up in here. And what it did, apparently in shipping, bouncing around because it wasn't glued down in place, it was just laying in here, it pulled this ribbon cable out of the board. That's all that was wrong with it. No ribbon cable, no power. The Gamera's also a CPU-controlled radio. Yeah, it unplugged the ribbon cable. I plugged the ribbon cable back in, turned it on, radio works fine. Now, the first thing I actually did notice was the RF power on this thing is ridiculously high. Now, luckily, the owner of this, I know him. He knows how to properly use a radio, so he didn't smoke it, but it's kind of fortunate that the other guy didn't get it, because if he wasn't a responsible radio operator like this guy is, it may not have lasted too long. So this has a 2SC1969 driver and two 2SC1969 finals. And this thing had a carrier. If you turned the variable RF power control on this thing up the whole way, it was dead keying 20 watts. Yeah, so 10 watts per final. Can a 2SC1969 do that? Yes, it can. Will it last very long? No, not at all. And I didn't even check. I would have to assume with a 10-watt carrier, it had almost no modulation to speak of either. But I contacted the customer. I explained what had happened. Yeah, it wasn't really anybody's fault, other than at some point in time somebody, improperly basically put this module up here, and it wasn't secured, and it moved around in shipping, bouncing around in the back of trucks or airplanes, and it ripped, it pulled the ribbon cable out of the socket. So, really didn't need any repairs. He said, well, does it really need anything? I said, well, it is a 1990s radio, so you can see, get the light right, you can see, I get a pointer here. If you look down in here, you can see the glue is starting to get, as I say, corrosive conductive glue. And you can see this wire right here, it's starting to corrode. So, that glue's all around the toroid transformers. Now, it doesn't hurt the enamel-coated wire. Trying to get the light right. It doesn't hurt the actual wire itself where there's enamel coating on it. The glue apparently can't penetrate that stuff. The problem is that glue is also touching where all of that enamel coating is removed, and the wires go down through the board. And eventually it will either short out the transformer, and you just won't have any RF power out, or it'll eat the leads off of the wires, and again, you won't have any output power. So he asked me, he said, what do you recommend doing to this? Honestly, it works fine. Obviously, it has good power. It'll do a 20-watt carrier. And yes, I checked, and of course, the AM carrier pot right here is cranked to full rotation, so that's why it's putting out a 20-watt carrier. But I said, honestly, it's a good working radio. The only thing it really needs remove the corrosive glue, an alignment, put the covers back on it. Doesn't really need anything else. I mean, you could replace the caps in it, but these are decent quality capacitors in this. It's not having any problems. So, you know, and again, he might sell this thing again, you know, but the thing is, if he sells it now, he'll be able to show where it was sent in. You know, it had any future problems it may have, the corrosive glue have been fixed. It's had a proper transceiver alignment. Power levels, the big thing here is the power levels will be properly adjusted per the service manual. No crazy watts coming out of this thing when I get done with it. And yeah, it should be a good radio for years and years to come. So, yep, let me get to degluing. I've actually already removed, you'll notice the negative wire is actually unsoldered. I've removed the two RF shields. I've got to thinking about it, like, well, I don't think I've ever done a video on one of these radios, but yeah, these shields that originally have been right there and there. There's one screw in there and 3 screws, and then a boatload of terminals that get soldered down to the board in the RF shield. But I've already pulled those off because, of course, the toroid transformers are right underneath, right where these shields are. So let me get to start working on that. I don't think I even got that video uploaded actually yet. I've got, God, dozens and dozens of videos I've actually got to get uploaded. I've found a new way, because that glue is a pain in the butt to get off. And it honestly is all but impossible to get out of all these windings and these toroid. I just can't get any light down in there. All these RF shields are blocking the light. But you can see how that glue gets around all that wire. There's just really no way to get it out of there. Until several weeks ago, I was working on a President HR 2510, so, you know, another Uniden. That's who obviously made this Uniden. And a 2510 is the same thing. They have toroidal transformers very similar to this in their setup, and very common for the leads to break off, especially on those radios. They have some little teeny tiny I mean, the ferrite bead's only about that big around, and very small wires. Actually, just like that. As a matter of fact, little small ones like that. And they put a big blob of glue on it, and it just eats the leads off. And like I said, you try to clean the glue off, and yeah, you end up rewinding them. That's, long story short, there's no way to get it out. You just end up cutting everything off, starting from scratch, and rewinding the transformers. And what I found was that GC Electronics radio TV cement solvent that I use, oh, it works wonderful on this stuff. I was afraid it would eat the enamel coating off of the wire. It doesn't. It just softens that stuff up, and you can just take a stiff bristle brush and just brush all that goop off once it softens it up. So let me get these pulled out of here, and I'll show you what I mean. I'll drop one of these in my little can, soak them for a little while, and I'll show you how easily that just, yeah, what used to be an absolute nightmare trying to get that stuff off, I can now just brush off with a brush. So I shall return with all the transformers removed. Okay, so I've got all the transformers out now. They're all sitting back there along with all of the wires that have ferrite beads on them that also have that glue on there, because most of those are corroded. A bunch of the jumper wires have that glue on there, so they'll just get replaced. You know, just use pieces of cut-off leads to replace those. Just make sure they're the same gauge wire. But like I was saying, getting that glue off of the, you know, these toroid transformers can be a bit of a pain in the hoo-ha. As you can see, it just soaks. It's all, you know, down in the windings. Yeah, it just, you know, basically used to be all but impossible to get off without accidentally scraping the enamel coating off of the wire. So a lot of times I just rewind them. It's just faster to grab the box of enamel wire, just wind them up new. But there's an even better way. Just drop it in a little container here. This is just a cut-off, you know, electrolytic capacitor that was hollowed out. Makes a convenient little can for soaking things in. But so it's been soaking in there, and that glue normally that is, you know, very hard. Now the only thing I need to remove it is a brush. So there's some glue. It just brushes away. It's soft and rubbery. You know, when's the last time you saw this stuff flexible? You just don't. So yeah, there's the trick. Like I say, the thing is, you can get your brush bristles down in between the windings in, That just stuff just falls off, gone. They're good as new now. Just solder it back in there, put a dot of, there's one little spot on the top, but put that back in there. Instead of using corrosive glue, we'll just put a dot of hot glue on there, and yep, be good to go for, forever now, because there won't be anything in there that's going to become corrosive. And I just never understand. Let's see here, where's my arrow? It goes that way. I will never understand why they use that glue. Here's a prime example. So I got all the glue out in here, and a couple other spots, took the caps out, cleaned the glue off. But a prime example was this ceramic filter right here, the 455 filter, had a blob of it right here. What is just to the right and in front of that? A blob of hot glue. They use hot glue. You can, it's touching electrical terminals. That's what I use, hot glue, because it's non-conductive. It's, and it's plastic. It's all. If you ever look up the data sheets for this stuff, you can get the chemical composition for it. It's basically elastopolymers and whatnot. Basically a bunch of inert materials. They use corrosive glue in one spot, and not a quarter inch away from it, they've got hot glue. Why didn't they just use hot glue on all of this? I will never understand that. And they continue. All radio manufacturers, to this day, most all of them still use this corrosive glue. Hot glue's got to be cheaper. This stuff is cheap. It's got to be cheaper than that glue. I'll never understand that. Why they must use... it's just one of those annoying things when you work on radios. You see stuff like that, just makes no sense. But yeah, that is so easy to get that stuff off now. Whoever thought you could remove it with a bristle brush? So there you go. That's the easy way to get that stuff off. Okay, so she's back together. Well, except for the covers. But, got her on channel 11 there. And down to 6. So the bowl's starting to roll in here. Yeah, whatever he said. I'm definitely not a bowl person. I'll just never get. I'll never get with those guys. They never say anything. But so it's a good working radio. It is now. Oh my God, was this thing ever distorted? This was definitely a screwdriver special. Now they didn't butcher anything. Nothing was clipped. All the limiters were still in circuit. But this is one of those radios where, with the limiter circuits still 100% functional, if you just turn the ALC and the AMC controls, to full rotation, yeah, you might as well just disable them, because it, wow, was it ever distorted. On sideband, the IMD, or intermodulation distortion, was just, yeek. This thing, and AM was even worse. It was encompassing probably 5 channels. You probably could have heard this thing farther than 5 channels. But yeah, the AMC and ALC were cranked to full rotation. Somebody had been doing a little bit of coil spreading on the coil down in there. I've repressed that back together. Actually, just respread it a little bit for 54 megahertz suppression. But yeah, somebody just had it spread out as far as it would go. And of course, that did bring the carrier power up, but yeah, a little bit. But they had carrier power up the whole way too, because when you had the RF power turned up, this thing was doing like 20 watts. So yeah, everything's turned down to where it should be. Receive did pick up a little bit, not a phenomenal amount. It was a good receiving radio before, but I was able to get a little bit better reception out of it. But the transmit is night and day difference now. Yeah, it just, if you don't have at the least an oscilloscope and a tone generator, a signal generator, for AM, if you have an AM only radio, all you need is a single tone. If you're working on radios that have sideband, you have to have at least a 2-tone generator. To be able to do a 2-tone, to adjust your ALC, you need to have at least a 2-tone generator. Now, some time ago, God, it's probably a year, I don't know, however long ago that was, I did a little video demonstrating how to make just a little simple, on just a little board, just slap it inside of a little plastic project box, make a little simple 2-tone generator. Is that the ideal piece of equipment to use? No, but for the operator it's just fine. But yeah, it was... So everything, all of the corrosive glue, all's been removed, all the transformers put back in, a little bit of hot glue on everything, something that won't turn corrosive in 10 years or so. But so it's ready to go back together now. Good working radio. This one, I don't think, I didn't actually play with it really, but I don't think this has the expanded channels. I think this one's just stock. Like I said, I don't get to work on these very much. I actually had to play with it to remember that, like if you disconnect the power cord, let me just disconnect the antenna. So if you unhook the power cord, you remove power from the radio, as soon as you plug the power in, it's flashing code at you. So to get out of that, it's kind of like the buyer's a security code to stick in there, but you can bypass that. You just, I didn't do it fast enough. Sitting here jibber-jabbering. Let me unplug the power. So just push the program key 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and then hit the power button, and bam, turns it on. But you can go in with holding the PA, the dimmer control, and turning the radio on, and then when code flashes, you press one of the, either M1 or one of 2 other buttons, and that'll get you into different bands and modes, and because this thing will do UK, do CEPT, VFO style mode with just different bands. But yeah, there's lots of different. It's the only thing. It's not just a single button on the front that you push. Like more modern radios, it's very easy once you do usually modifications like that to get into your different bands. This one was kind of archaic and clunky how you got into it. But yeah, otherwise good working radio. All the functions work. Noise blanker. I think I had mentioned this little module here. Actually, it's supposed to be in the radio. This is the ASC, or the automatic squelch control. I guess the original circuitry they had in these things didn't work very well. And they eventually put these little modules in here, and they're kind of bodged in, and that was the whole reason the radio ended up showing up here, was the module was mounted up here. Well, actually, it wasn't mounted, it was just shoved in here, and it ripped this ribbon cable out. So, if you ever get one of these radios, you plug it in, nothing happens. Absolutely nothing. No receive, no transmit. More importantly, no display, no lights, no nothing on the front panel. First thing you should do is take off the cover that has the bottom cover with the speaker on it. Check to make sure both of these ribbon cables are properly plugged into their associated plugs on the main board and up on the display board. Now that can be kind of tricky. You might have to take out the 2 screws on each side and pull the faceplate out and rotate. Turn the radio over and then kind of rotate the faceplate to be able to get in there with a pair of needle nose pliers to try and get those ribbon cables in, because they're kind of tricky to get plugged in. But yeah, that was basically the whole problem with this thing. But now that it's turned down, the power is turned actually way down on this thing, down to a more reasonable level where it should be, and modulation and AMC circuits are properly adjusted. This is a really good sounding radio. So there you go. There's just a vintage President George, repaired and ready to put back into service and do another probably 20, 30 years worth of service.